test it. Dan and Betty? Come on in. Please feel free to have a seat. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Please feel free to take your time with water. I'll go ahead and get started with introductions. Hi, my name is Barbara Dillon. I am the editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press, and I'm honored to be moderating today the Fanbase Press Presents the Impact of LGBTQ Comics Creators and Readers panel, and to be joined by these incredibly talented creative professionals who will share their experiences, their inspirations, and their advice for pushing comics forward to best highlight LGBTQ voices and characters. So without further ado, I would like to introduce each of our panelists. To my right here, we have Jennifer Lopez, who is one of the hosts of Comadres y Comics, which is a wonderful podcast highlighting Latinx voices. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Next to Jen is Teresa Jacino, who is the founder of Almanac Entertainment and formerly a journalist with themarysue.com. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We also have Ted Abenheim, who is the president and founder of Prism Comics. Ted, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, we have Amanda Donahue, who is the artist of one of Fanbase Press's releases, The Margins. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So first, I want the audience to learn a little bit about you as individuals. So for each of you, what attracted you to comics before becoming creators, journalists, retailers, and publishers? And how would you describe your initial experiences with the industry? And Jen, we'll start with you.
So I am bisexual, just to put that out there. And I first ventured into comics when I was in middle school, and it was because I was kind of a loner, kind of, sad little Latina girl reading comics. In my school, someone had donated a bunch of comics, and I started reading those, and I was just like, oh, this is pretty cool. Spider-Man's pretty cool. And so I wanted to learn more, so I went to a comic shop that was in Norwalk, and the reception was not very nice. I was 13, I was awkward, and the atmosphere was very hostile. So I was just like, your girl is out. And I didn't get back into comics until after high school, and I was in college, and there was a comic book store across the street from the community college I was going to. And I stepped in, and the reception was a lot more friendlier, and I never looked back.
Teresa, what about you?
Well, I started reading comics when I was about elementary school age, doing the standard like Archie comics and like comics in the newspaper, whatever. Then somehow I got the message that like, you're too old for comics. I don't know who gave me that message, I don't know what, but like, I was too old for comics, so I just stopped and didn't really question it. I wish I could say that I was cool enough that I like kept reading them anyway, but like I was totally that girl who like wanted to be cool even though I never was. So all of my like sci-fi interests, all of my whatever kind of went by the wayside while I was trying to put like lipstick on and trying to be like, fashionable, and I was not, so I failed. But then as I got older, I started embracing my geekery again. And around 2004, a friend of mine who never stopped reading comics introduced me to Sandman. And was like, Teresa, oh my God, you're such a literary nerd, you would love Sandman, oh my God. And I read it and I was like, wait, comics can be this? Are you kidding me? And then I read Marvel Civil War and I was like, wait, superhero comics can be this and make you think about politics? What? And then I just started reading everything, and so I became like a hardcore comics fan as an adult.
Ted, what about you?
Well, I was into comics when I was a little kid, mostly the superhero comics. It was way before, it was a number of decades ago. But, and I was got out of it for a while, but when I started becoming more active in the LGBT community, I started seeking out groups and organizations that shared my interests, and found out that there was LGBT comics. So I wasn't one of the founders of Prism Comics, but I got in very early. Prism is 15 years old. I got in about 13 years ago, just volunteering at Comic-Con, because at that time it was, a lot different. LGBTQ creators were marginalized, LGBTQ characters were marginalized, but there were so many indie comics out there with people telling their own stories, and their voices were not being heard. They were not being heard in the popular media. So this is what attracted me to getting into at least LGBT comics. I still follow the mainstream comics, and luckily there's mainstream LGBT characters there now too. So.
Amanda, what about you?
So for me, I started very young with the Charlie Brown peanut strips. My parents had an old treasury, and I was so young, all I'd seen at that point was, illustrations and children's books, and I loved how you had the pictures telling the story at the same time as the words. And as I grew older, I kept reading that. I never really got into superhero comics, but then I got into anime, and then from there to manga, and I was just kind of blown away by the variety of style and stories you can get in manga that I didn't see a lot in just Western media in general. And kind of going along with the theme of the panel, I loved how in Sailor Moon you had Haruka, whose gender was very fluid, and she had this great relationship with Michiru. And then in a lot of the clamp titles, you had a lot of non-hetero romances, and this was very eye-opening to me. I'm the token straight on the panel today, but it was just great to see people being represented in a way that I didn't get to see in a lot of the more mainstream media here. And then from there, I kept with that. I started looking more into Sandman was kind of the first, American comic outside of Peanuts that I was really blown away by. And my first time working in the industry has been with Barbara in Fanbase Press, and my first book, Margins. And so far it's been really great.
Amanda, to stick with the idea of representation, this is a question for everyone. Have you witnessed the comics community become more representative and more inclusive? And in what aspects have you noticed the greatest change? And Jen, we'll start again with you.
So, when I was 13 and into comics, the answer would have been a firm no. Within the past 5 years, I think within comic books itself, there has been a lot more representation now. 5 years ago, we didn't have America Chavez. We didn't have, there was Young Avengers, and there was Wiccan and Teddy's relationship, but it was more hinted at. It was just or they said that they were a couple, but they didn't really show that they were a couple. But it's only been in the past couple of years with Karen Gillan's run on Young Avengers, and with more of a push for inclusivity that I've been starting to see more content. The content has always been there, it's just never been visible. And now there is an active role to push that visibility. The first time I went to a con and I saw Prison Comics, I was just like, oh my god, there is a whole section for LGBTQ comics. I was astounded. I was so happy to see that. And every time I come to a con and I see you guys there, I am so happy.
Well, thank you. That's why we're here.
And it's stuff like that you don't realize is there. But now, with a presence at cons, more push within Marvel and DC, but also within places like Image and Vertigo and Dark Horse, they are actively trying to tell these stories. And I think now there is a lot more content that we know of than what had been 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Teresa, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely have noticed a change. I was kind of freelance writing about pop culture and comics and various other media for close to 10 years, and in that time there's definitely more options. The fact that something like a Lumberjanes exists, where it's not only queer representation, but queer representation for young people specifically, is huge. Something that I do notice that I hope will change and continue to evolve, I do notice that it's because of a lot of female creators that this is happening. And so it's a lot of female characters that are kind of allowed to be queer, whereas male characters, it still feels like we're kind of behind as far as allowing them to be visibly queer in comics. So some place where I think where we kind of haven't caught up in mainstream comics or otherwise is kind of male queer representation in comics, but hopefully that'll be changing along with the lesbian and bi females that we see in media right now.
Ted, what about you?
You answered the question very similarly. Yes, I mean there's been a large change in mainstream, queer characters, obviously, and the indie publishers with Lumberjanes. I think Kevin Keller from Archie was a major step forward, because look at Archie Comics is like for kids, and it's very traditional. But they tackled Kevin Keller being gay straight on with, I mean, I thought it was beautiful how they addressed personal issues, coming out issues with school. I mean, they made it also, comics are not supposed to be message based, but they were able to cover a lot of different facets of being gay. Now, we've kind of covered L and G pretty well, and the push is more towards the other letters of the alphabet, and trans and bi, and I mean, that's where the frontiers are being pushed right now. But there's a lot more, and the webcomics have been like amazing in that area, because you don't have to get the money together.
Yeah,
just do it.
Do it. And I'm not familiar with all that's out there, although went on just back to Kickstarter the other day, and then went on, all of a sudden all these other queer Kickstarter projects came up, and I went, wow. So yeah, it's out there. There's still lots of stories to tell, though. So.
Yeah. Like Ted was saying, well, this is a bit of a history lesson for me, because I'm just not as up to date with comics and the history of LGBT representation in it, but in webcomics is probably where I first started to see it a lot, and again, it's because it's coming straight from the creator. There's nothing, no company, no editor trying to stop them from telling those stories, which I think is really great. My background is first in animation, and I think in animation that's also something that's happening too. You see it in mainstream shows now like Adventure Time and especially Steven Universe, where it's being pushed towards children, that their experiences are normal and felt by other people. It's not just them alone, and that's really great to see.
Again, for the group, what do you feel is missing from the industry? And it can be for animation, for comics, for webcomics, and when it comes to LGBTQ representation, what do you hope to see in the future by way of change? And Jen, again, we'll start with you.
For me, it's in media, especially in popular media, there's this trope of kill your gays. And I absolutely loathe it. And people don't seem to realize that this is a very long-standing trope, and they're like, oh, well, they're suffering, the sad gay sob story. I'm just like, yes, we've had this for like the past 50 years. Please let it die. And it's still such a prevalent one, the fact that queerness is equivalent to suffering. And I'm just like, no, that's not how it actually is. And I think Barbara with Fanbase Press and Amanda, the margins, like you do not understand how much I love this book, because it's there's a queer couple in the book, and it's delivered so nonchalantly. So like, this is normal. That is exactly what I want to see. That is exactly like we're making this big deal that this character is queer and that they've been suffering forever because of their queerness and how they've hated it. And I'm just like, no, we're just normal, or whatever normal stands for these days. But it's unique, but it's also like please don't treat us as other. That's and I think that's still what a lot of the mentality is that we are seen as other, and that's not the case at all.
Teresa, what about you?
I mean, I actually agree with what Ted said earlier about the other letters of the alphabet. I'm bi as well, and getting a nuanced bisexual character. We have America Chavez. We need more of that. More trans characters as well. My wife is trans, and she has been like loving Kim and Kim. But it can't just be about Kim and Kim. Like, it can't just be on Magdalene Visaggio's, it can't just be her job to make this happen for everybody. So it's starting to happen, but we need more of that representation. And also, where, kind of alluding to what you said about being othered, the fact that it seems to be a thing to have some kind of queer representation to make it like a marketing thing. It's, it's like, sales are low, let's announce that somebody's queer and it'll be a news story. I kind of just want to see the representation happen without there being fanfare. It's just like, oh, this is a story arc now.
Iceman.
Right, Iceman.
Yeah. Well, luckily they're bringing it back. We get a lot of requests at our booth for ACE, material, and there's not a lot of it out there. And you, as you were saying, yes, bi and trans, we need a lot more of that too, but I mean, in particular, repeatedly, people come up and ask for ace material. So one of our board members, Tara Madison Avery, started her own publication company, and so she published the first all-trans anthology, which we have at our booth, and is pushing into that area. Books for younger people, there are more and more, but we do, I mean, it's been within the last 3-4 years that we've had parents come by with young kids asking for material, and luckily there are some publishers that are doing that, but I mean, I had somebody today ask for something for somebody that's, for books for somebody that's 6. I don't know that there's that much out there. There's 2, we have them at our booth, but yeah, the opportunities out there, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think in addition to seeing it, whether it's on screen or on paper, just making sure that the people behind it are also more inclusive, that we're hiring more, I think makes a huge difference. It's not just, maybe another white straight man telling that story. You want to make sure you're getting those other voices in the room to tell it.
Teresa, as both a creator and a journalist, you've had a wonderful gift of being able to put news stories into the world and also to highlight creators and stories that are making a positive impact. So I'm curious, what can you tell us about your experiences in the industry, and likewise, how has it impacted you?
Oh, that's a big question. Just let me tell my whole life story. No, I mean, it's interesting because I am a creator, I'm a writer primarily. Being a creator who also is a critic, it's interesting being on both sides of the table because, and a lot of people would get mad at me very often because I'm not hard enough on creators sometimes for their liking, but like, I'm also a creator and I understand how things get made, so it's a fine line between like understanding where a story comes from and understanding where things can be fixed and how it works and all of that. But it does inform my own creation of the narratives I want to tell, having been on the flip side of critiquing other people's work, of being on the side of fandom and kind of hearing what the needs are and what the desires are. Not that it changes necessarily the story I'd want to tell, but it changes how I would tell it. It changes my approach from the beginning. Because something that really bugs me is that inclusion and diversity is kind of shoehorned in at the end of the process a lot of the time. It's like they'll write a comic script or a script or anything and just be like, oh crap, it's all white straight people. What do I do? And it's like, maybe if you thought about it 10 steps back, you wouldn't have this problem now. So it really informs both what I create and as a producer of other people's work, what I hope to encourage creators I work with to do. I actually just wanted to real quick, because Amanda brought up the, employing other queer professionals and other marginalized folks to create things. And it's so funny because back when comics first started, it was the place where marginalized people got jobs. Because like back in the 50s when like comics were getting censored and whatnot, like it's where like creators of color would go because regular publishing wouldn't hire them. It's where all the queer professionals went so it's like, it's weird that it's become like this bastion of like straight white men because it didn't start that way. And it's like they kind of just took it over and made it theirs, but it wasn't theirs to begin with. So we gotta kind of go back to the way it was and what it was originally intended for, which is a place where marginalized people can feel safe.
Jen, you've likewise had the opportunity to highlight positive voices in the comic book industry through the podcast Commodities Comics at the end of the comic book shop, Heidi Hill Comics in Santa Monica. So what can you share with us about the opportunity to feature not only LGBTQ creators and stories, but also Latinx creators and voices?
So I run a podcast, and it's hosted by 3 Latino women, and what we do is, well, our main focus is women and Latinx creators. We have a section called Juntos y Fuertes where we highlight books or people for marginalized communities who need help, and that is like whether it's I remember like, what was it, a year ago, a trans creator was getting death threats and for creating her comics, and we decided to like, oh, please support, to highlight basically, please support this this person, because the word wasn't really getting out that they needed help, that they needed support, and whether it's just by reading their comics or buying one of their comics online. That's how we support via the podcast, is that we basically actively look for marginalized communities in need, or creators who need a voice, and even though we're just like a small podcast and stuff, we like to make people aware of it. I also work at Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, and I proactively look, because I help with ordering books and with basically looking at stuff that we sell. And even if something that is new, I actively look to see if it has queer representation. And I convince my boss, like, oh, we should hire this, because we should buy this because of it features a queer character, it features a character of color, a creator of color, or a writer, a queer writer. And we keep it in stock. And at the shop itself, we have this kind of like a small little theme, or like basically a place to put comics that we find interesting. And if they each have a theme, we try to go with like, oh, it's Hispanic History Month, it's Black History Month, it's LGBT month, and that's usually what we do. But every once in a while, when there isn't something, we actively just try to be like, oh, here is a comic that we think is really good that people should read, even though it isn't superheroes and stuff like that.
Thanks, Jen. Ted, as the president of Prism Comics, you have a forum for promoting LGBTQ awareness and also to give new opportunities to creators through the Queer Press grant. What can you tell us about the evolution of Prism Comics and the impact of the grant?
Well, Prism grew out of basically a group of fans. I don't know if people know about the Gay League. It's still around. It's online. It's a community group. I wasn't there at the founding, but they got together and wanted to form an official nonprofit group, specifically to be able to award money to people to help develop their comics, and that's where Prism and the grant got started. The grant's 12 years old, and there are a lot of people who got the grant who've gone on to do, terrific stuff. Justin Hall, Ed Luce, Elizabeth Byer, a lot of different people. Kickstarter's going to change that landscape, because you can raise, Alex Wilson raised almost $100,000 for Kickstarter for his comics. And we're 2,000, so it's a little smaller. But still, I think it's still an important grant. We are beginning the process again January 1st, and it will be announced at WonderCon. It's about a 2-month process, and am I going on too long?
No, not at all.
We urge people to submit. We ask you to submit the project, a synopsis, a business plan, your financial status, and things, and depending on that. There's a number of judges who won the grant and other judges. So that's somewhat of the evolution, because there weren't that many outlets when it was started. There weren't webcomics. It was still expensive to do an indie comic, and then getting it published or distributed through Diamond or anybody else.
I think it's important to note, anyone in the audience who may be a creator and interested in pursuing the grant, information is and will be available
It's
on
on
the
the
website.
website. Yeah.
Excellent.
PrismComics.org. We're also doing a Prism Awards, but we'll talk about that later.
Amanda, as the artist behind the Margins graphic novel, what can you share about your creative journey in bringing the characters to life and in featuring positive representations of LGBTQ characters?
So it all really starts with the words. My authors, David DeCampo and Paul Montgomery, when they first showed me the character bios, the rough scripts, the outline, they were very, I felt, respectful and thoughtful when portraying these two female characters in color, and also they're women of color. And so really it was starting with that. And I knew going forward that I wanted to be mindful of not falling onto stereotypes for either situation, because I'm coming at it from having not experienced that. So I want to be sure that the camera or the panels was never voyeuristic on them and their relationship, because I feel like that's a lot of the time there's a fetishization of both women of color and also women couples. So I wanted to avoid that. I really want to portray them, like Jen was saying, as it's not a suffering, it's just they're living their lives. They're these two women, they're new to Portland, they want to make a life with each other. They started as friends and then became a couple. And I wanted to really portray that feeling of being comfortable with each other. So a lot of that is in the body language and how like they're leaning on each other, they're holding hands openly in public, just being cute and coupley. That'd be cute to do. And then when it came to character design, I wanted to, again, be mindful of how I'm portraying them, and then also ways to show their personalities. So Charlie is an artist like myself. I see myself the most in her. She's a little bit very self-conscious with her art. She can be a bit of a homebody, and so you see that in her clothing. She wears a lot of like button-ups. She has a bit more of an androgynous style, and it's kind of a bit of her shield to like shield away from the world. I think she's the one who's most anxious about the outside world, and then Rita is there to kind of help push her out to try new things. Her clothing's more flowy. She's a bit more fun and outgoing, and it was just really fun getting to play with them and have them, interacting, have little small interactions that you see in panels that aren't like really important to the story, but important to developing their characters. What was the second part of the question?
I think you answered it very well.
Did it?
Yeah,
Okay.
you did. Yes, absolutely. I know that this next question is a delicate one, but for me, as an individual and as a publisher, I feel that it's my duty to ask this and pose this to you. So I know that this is a very tumultuous time in our country right now. How do you find hope, inspiration, and courage, and how do you apply these tenets to your art? And Jen, we'll start with you.
Well, I just talk about stuff, and I love talking. So that's why I'm on the podcast. And for me, it's the biggest example that I can think of is when they were separating kids at the border from their parents, and then I saw the Raíces rising up and basically saying we need help, we need your help, and people were willing to pitch in help. They raised over $12 million to help people, to help reunite children with their parents, and that sign of solidarity of people who were compassionate, that gave me a lot of hope, and I really like that people are reaching out, that people can be compassionate in such trying times.
Teresa.
It's funny, I find a lot of hope in looking at history, which sounds weird because history is full of garbage, but it's also full of people fighting against the garbage. And the garbage always loses and comes back, and then gets beaten down again, and comes back, and gets beaten down again. And there are always the people around ready to fight the garbage. So I find a lot of hope in that. And also in getting off of social media and talking to people one-on-one. That has been huge for my mental health, especially as somebody who wrote a lot for the internet. I have a long career in writing for the internet, and that can be a toxic wormhole of despair. But when you actually interact with people face to face and actually have conversations that are hard but important, I feel like you get a lot further. And a lot of times, especially for the queer community, the online space is important. It's huge, and we need that space. But it's also like, finding more reasons to connect in meet space with our community and with allies and people who care about us, and remembering that like we're actually all like flesh and blood people that can be talked to and nudged if necessary. So yeah.
I'm not a creator. I mean, I just help run the organization, and I mean, I have hope and faith too, even though things look, really bad. But so in a sense, I'm just doing my part to help get Prism out there so that we are there for people, like you said, face to face. So parents can bring their kids up, so teachers can come up, or everybody can come up and see what's out there. And, fingers crossed about, about all of the rest. But I mean, I don't know a lot of that many political comics, queer comics that are out there going on today. But I mean, the fight is being done and the voices are being heard. So, at least in terms of trans creators and bi creators, we're being attacked in a number of areas. Hopefully that will turn the tide or help people to see.
Amanda?
I get hope in just seeing that there's such a strong sense of resistance, especially in young people, because they're the ones that are going to be able to change this and fix this, hopefully. Sorry, that was rude. And for myself, I just try to be more mindful of what kind of power I have, and making sure I'm not speaking over other people who need to have their stories told and their voices heard. And as far as like what I can do as a creator, you know, I just like drawing things that make people happy. Like if it makes me happy, it's making someone else happy in their day-to-day life. That's enough for me.
As may often be the case with creators or individuals running publishing companies, it can be challenging to find time to consume comics and other media. So I'm curious, are there any comic book properties that you would like to highlight for the audience as your current favorite LGBTQ portrayals or creators who are doing incredible work? Jen, we'll start with you.
Well, right now there is, and I just saw this on Diamond, OMG Check Please, which
Yes.
is being published very soon, and I read this while it was a webcomic, and it was really, really cute, and but it's being published now, and right now that's kind of like on my radar, and something that I will recommend the heck out of to people when it finally comes into comic book stores.
Which is soon. It's coming out
Yeah,
for a
very
second.
soon.
Yeah.
Teresa?
It's so funny. One of my favorite titles right now that I'm kind of obsessed with is Paper Girls. And I, you know, adore, like, there's a budding queer relationship starting to happen in the title that I love, precisely because it has to do with, you know, young people. And watching that kind of happen awkwardly and with time travel is great.
I just one title which I never thought I would pick up was Snagglepuss, and
Oh my God! I was so
this is
surprised how
brilliant
good it
book.
was. Yes.
It's like, I mean, yes, it is for a certain, generation that would understand growing up during the McCarthy era and that, but it's a brilliant book. And it's coming out in paperback. There was another book, I'll go on a limb because I don't remember the title and I don't remember the publisher, but it's about a society where love is forbidden. It's from one of the, like, Image